Have you ever noticed how rapid growth, like whether that's in a hot new startup or a booming city, or, even just a grassroots community group, how it often ends up accidentally marginalizing the most vulnerable people?
Oh, yeah. Constantly.
It's this strange, almost inevitable paradox, right? As things scale up, those natural organic relationships start to break
All
down.
right, the informal networks just can't hold the weight anymore.
Exactly. And suddenly people start falling through the cracks. It's kind of a modern epidemic. You end up with people feeling completely invisible in a crowded room.
It's an incredibly common phenomenon. When a system relies purely on, whoever happens to know whoever, growth instantly creates blind spots.
Yeah.
The people with the deepest roots and the loudest voices thrive, and the newcomers, or just those who don't know how to navigate the informal network, they become completely invisible.
They just get missed. And that exact tension is the beating heart of our deep dive today. We are exploring a message from Pastor Florin at Agape Community Church.
Yeah, and this is part of their fiscal year 2026 to 27 ministry focus series, right?
Right. It's titled Released, the Spirit-Formed Church on Mission. Now, before we jump into the ancient history here, let's quickly set the table. This audio is actually just one piece of a three-part approach they use for this Sunday message.
It's a really holistic way to learn, honestly. First, you have the live Sunday sermon, which is shaped for the gathered church in the room, pastoral, person-to-person ministry.
Right. The moment itself.
Exactly. Then second, they drop a fuller midweek video teaching on their YouTube channel.
So you can actually slow down.
Yeah, slow down, go deeper into the text, engage through pausing and note-taking. And then third, you have this deep dive, which, just as a quick heads up, is developed with a little help from AI, but fully reviewed by Pastor Florin.
Right. And this podcast, along with the apprenticeship groups, is where the message is processed in community, preached for the room, explored for depth, and discussed for real-life application.
Because following Jesus isn't just about what happens in your head on a Sunday morning.
No, not at all. It's an apprenticeship.
Yes.
It requires real practice. It's about actively participating in a totally different kind of community culture.
Seeking God's kingdom first.
Exactly like Jesus talks about in Matthew 6.33. Followers of Jesus are adopted into God's family, his nation, his kingdom, and that kingdom has a real identity and culture. Everything we think, say, and do is built on that priority.
Which is why today's practice is anchored in this fascinating moment in history, found in Acts chapter 6, verses 1 through 7.
Yeah, so if you are able to right now, go ahead and pause the audio, pull out your Bible or your app, and read Acts 6.1 to 7 in the NIV or whatever version you have on hand. Then hit play and let's unpack this together.
And assuming you've read it, you'll immediately see how this ancient text perfectly mirrors that modern problem of organizational growth we were just talking about.
Okay, so let's unpack this. We've got the early church in Jerusalem. The numbers are absolutely exploding.
Thousands of people in a very short time.
Right, but suddenly a complaint arises. The Hellenistic Jews are saying their widows are being overlooked in the daily distribution of food.
While the Hebraic Jews' widows are getting exactly what they need.
Now wait, hold on. When I hear the word Hellenistic, my brain immediately goes to, Greek Gentiles. Was this just flat-out racial discrimination in the early church?
See, that is a very common misconception.
Mhm.
And it's something Pastor Florin's notes draw on deep historical research to clarify. This was absolutely not a Jews versus Gentiles conflict.
Really?
Yeah, and it wasn't malicious, intentional discrimination either.
Yeah.
Both of these groups were Jewish followers of Jesus.
Okay, so what was the actual dividing line then, if it wasn't racial?
It was cultural and linguistic. So the Hebraic Jews were the locals. They had deep, multi-generational social roots in Jerusalem. They spoke Aramaic.
Okay.
And they naturally operated through existing family and neighborhood networks.
Hmm.
But the Hellenistic Jews, on the other hand, were likely Greek-speaking.
Oh, I see.
Yet many of them were diaspora Jews, essentially immigrants who had moved back to Jerusalem from other parts of the Greco-Roman world. They loved God, they followed Jesus, but they simply didn't have the same local social capital.
Ah, okay. It's exactly like that grassroots charity scaling up. The founders start out and they know every single person they're helping.
Right, they know all the names.
But then they triple in size. The local insiders naturally get served because they know the grapevine. They know whose door to knock on and they speak the local slang.
Exactly.
But the newcomers, the widows who maybe only speak Greek and don't have extended family in the city to advocate for them, they get missed. Not because anyone is cruel, but because the informal organic network just doesn't reach them.
Precisely. A Greek-speaking widow with fewer locally embedded connections falls completely outside the communication channels of the Aramaic-speaking locals who are, handing out the bread.
Wow.
And it's funny because even in a utopian, spirit-filled community like the early church where people are literally selling their land to help each other out, they still hit a wall.
Which really brings us to one of those foundational questions we use to study the Bible. Like, what does this reveal about humanity, about our condition?
It highlights a hard truth about our human limitations. Even in a deeply loving community, organic relational networks have limits.
It really shows that good intentions don't automatically equal equitable care.
No, they don't.
You can have amazing theology, you can have a heart of gold, but if your structure relies purely on who you happen to bump into, people are going to starve.
That is a fantastic way to put it. Love requires adaptation. Because organic relationships were no longer enough to support the weight of the mission, the church had to adapt. They had to create a new structure to make sure these widows were fed.
Right. But what's crazy to me is how they adapted. Because if this happened in a modern corporation, they would just write a soulless corporate policy.
Or form a bureaucratic committee.
Exactly. But the apostles do something totally different.
What's fascinating here is how the apostles respond to the crisis. They don't dismiss the complaint. They don't get defensive about it. They gather the community and say, "Choose 7 men from among you who are known to be full of the Spirit and wisdom." And if you look closely at Acts 6.5, the names of the 7 men chosen: Stephen, Philip, Prochorus, Nicanor, Timon, Parmenas, and Nicholas. They're all Greek names. Nicholas is even explicitly identified as a convert to Judaism from Antioch.
That detail blew my mind when I first saw it. They didn't just form a random task force.
Yep. Yeah.
They empowered leaders from the exact demographic that was being marginalized. They entrusted the solution to the people who actually understood the cultural world of those being overlooked.
Yes. And if we ask another foundational question, what does this say about God, about his character? It tells us so much.
Yeah. How so?
God deeply desires equity and genuine care for the vulnerable.
Huh?
And notice something else that often gets missed here. God doesn't separate the spiritual work from the practical work.
Wait, let me push back on that for a second. If the apostles were the ultimate God-ordained leaders of this movement, why didn't they just work harder? Or, I don't know, why didn't they just hire an administrative assistant to handle the food? Why hand over the reins to the congregation? I mean, isn't preaching the gospel the real spiritual work?
That's the exact dichotomy we often fall into today.
Hmm.
We tend to think preaching is the spiritual stuff, and organizing food for widows is the secular or, like, the administrative stuff.
Exactly.
But look at the qualifications the apostles demand for this job. To hand out food to overlooked widows, these men must be full of the Spirit and wisdom.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, to God, caring for vulnerable people isn't a secular management task. It requires immense spiritual maturity. The people responsible for the practical problem must themselves be spiritually mature, because structure doesn't compete with the Spirit.
Spirit-filled people create and inhabit the structure.
Exactly.
Okay, that ties directly into Agape's fiscal year 26-27 ministry focus of building people, not programs. The church's goal isn't just to fill volunteer slots so the Sunday machine keeps running.
Right. It's about actually releasing prepared people into ministry.
That's what the early church did. They didn't view the congregation as a passive audience for the apostles. They saw them as active participants in the mission.
The apostles realized that they couldn't do everything. And, this is crucial, that their inability to do everything wasn't a failure. It was an invitation to release others.
Okay, so that raises a very practical question for anyone listening. How does a modern church actually do what Acts 6 did today? How do we ensure people aren't being overlooked right now without just burning out the pastoral staff?
Well, that brings us to Agape's ministry ecosystem, which consists of care circles, apprenticeship groups, and leadership formation. But specifically, Pastor Florin highlights a tool they use called the Ministry Kanban board.
Okay, full stop. When I hear Kanban board, my brain immediately goes to tech startups and like soulless corporate project management software.
Well, I know.
How on earth is a Kanban board a spiritual tool?
It sounds very administrative at first glance, I admit. In the corporate world, a Kanban board is just a visual tool, right? Moving cards from a backlog to in progress to done.
All right.
But at Agape, it operates completely differently. It is a spiritual tool for shared discernment. It takes the hidden needs, the ideas, and the community gaps that might only be known to 1 or 2 people and places them visually on a board for the whole church to see.
So mechanically, how does that actually work? Walk me through a scenario.
Okay, let's say someone in your care circle suddenly loses their job,
Yeah.
and their car breaks down in the same week.
Oh, man, that's heavy.
Right. Normally, that heavy burden might only be known to the pastor, who then has to figure out how to fix it alone. But with this system, that need goes onto a card on the board. It moves from hidden to visible.
Oh, I see. So on Sunday, the whole church looks at this board, and maybe a mechanic in the congregation sees that card and realizes, hey, I can fix their car for free this Tuesday.
Exactly.
And someone else says, I know a company hiring in their field. It shifts the burden from one exhausted pastor to a mobilized, empowered community.
Because before an item becomes a project to coordinate, it is a story that God has entrusted to his people. So instead of just the pastor carrying the weight, the whole church looks at the board and asks, where is Jesus already at work?
Yeah.
How is he inviting us to participate?
Which answers another of our foundational questions, right? What do I need to believe or obey from this text?
Yes, we have to obey the call to share the load. And we have to actually believe that God has equipped the whole body for ministry, not just a few professionals.
And we see that shared responsibility beautifully depicted back in Acts 6, specifically in verse 6. After the 7 men are chosen, they are presented to the apostles who prayed and laid their hands on them.
Yeah, and Pastor Floren's historical notes point out that this wasn't some magic ritual transferring superpowers from the apostles' hands into the 7.
Right.
It was a public commissioning.
It reminds me so much of Moses in Exodus 18.
Oh, absolutely.
Because when Moses was exhausting himself trying to judge every single dispute in Israel from morning till night, his father-in-law Jethro pulls him aside and basically says, what you are doing is not good. You're going to wear yourself out, and you're going to wear the people out. Jethro tells him to share the heavy burden with wise, capable leaders.
That is the perfect parallel. In both Exodus 18 and Acts 6, the mission had outgrown the highly centralized structure that previously carried it.
Yeah.
The laying on of hands in Acts 6 was the church publicly recognizing the character of these 7 men, entrusting them with real responsibility, and most importantly, placing them before God in prayer. It prevented the delegation from becoming merely a managerial handoff.
Right. They didn't just toss a binder on a desk and say, here's the new job description. Good luck sorting out the bread.
No, not at all. They said, we are entrusting you and this responsibility to God, and we are standing behind you. Biblical delegation is recognizing character, entrusting real responsibility, and publicly supporting the ministry you've asked someone to carry.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Because the church adapted its structure, and because they released a new team and shared the load, what was the actual result? Like verse 7.
The Lucan plot twist.
Yes. Verse 7 says, so the word of God spread. The number of disciples in Jerusalem increased rapidly, and a large number of priests became obedient to the faith. Priests.
It is a staggering reversal if you know the context.
Yeah, tell us about that.
Throughout the early chapters of Acts, the chief priests and the temple authorities are the primary antagonists.
Right, they're the bad guys in the narrative.
They're the ones arresting the apostles, throwing them in jail, demanding they stay silent.
Yeah.
But now, ordinary Jewish priests, the men who served daily in the temple, who slaughtered the sacrifices, who knew the scriptures and the religious bureaucracy inside and out.
Yeah.
They are suddenly converting to the way of Jesus in large numbers.
But why then? Why at that exact moment, right after an administrative dispute about food distribution?
Well, this touches on our fourth foundational question. Is there a promise, warning, or example to hold on to?
Yeah.
The example here is that a healthy, spirit-led structure removed the bottleneck for the gospel. Think about it from the perspective of those priests. They worked in a massive, wealthy temple system that often failed the poorest among them.
Oh, wow.
Then they look over at this new movement of Jesus followers, and the widows are actually being fed. The community's claim to radical love wasn't just empty theological rhetoric, you know? It was a visible, tangible reality on the streets.
Because the 7 took on that responsibility, the apostles were freed up to preach and pray without distraction, and the widows were cared for. The community's lived-out love became an undeniable witness.
Exactly. And that is the promise we have to hold on to. Healthy structure doesn't replace the Holy Spirit.
It unleashes it.
It unleashes it. It removes the bottlenecks. When we genuinely care for the vulnerable, when we close the gap between what we preach on Sunday and how we actually treat people on Tuesday, the world takes notice.
Yep.
Even the people you would assume are the absolute hardest to reach, like those deeply entrenched temple priests, they're drawn to the beauty and truth of the historic Christian faith because it changes everything about how we treat one another.
It really does. It shows that True unity isn't about avoiding complexity, and it's not about pretending differences don't exist. Unity is about responding faithfully and structurally to the people who are being overlooked.
Which brings us right to our front door. If you're looking at your own workplace, your family, or your community right now, you can probably spot this exact dynamic happening.
Absolutely. So, asking our final foundational question based on what we've unpacked today, who can you talk with or pray for? Is there someone in your periphery who might be falling through the cracks?
Someone who is outside your normal, organic relational network.
Right. Who can you actually talk to or pray with about that this week? Or maybe, if we're being honest, maybe you're the one feeling overlooked right now.
Yeah, that happens too.
And it's time to take that brave step and let your care circle or your apprenticeship group know. Make the hidden need visible.
I want to sincerely thank you for making the time to sit with us and participate today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Taking this time to slow down, to really engage with the scriptures, and to let them challenge how you view the world is no small thing. We deeply appreciate your curiosity and your dedication to growing in this apprenticeship to Jesus.
And as you continue that journey, don't forget to check out www.agapechurch.life. You can read more about Agape's beliefs there and find a ton of additional tools for the journey. But before we go, we want to leave you with a thought-provoking discussion starter for your apprenticeship group.
Yeah, this is a good one.
We've talked a lot today about the people who stepped up to lead those 7 men, but think about the apostles for a second. To make this work, they had to give up control. To truly build people and not programs, you have to be willing to let someone else do the job.
And maybe even do it differently than you would.
Exactly. So here is the question for you to mull over. Where in your life are you holding onto control so tightly that you're actually preventing someone else from stepping into their calling?